we get started. I did grade just about everybody's scene analysis. I made those only worth 10%, so it's a very low score. Your midterm is going to be 15. Your next essay is like 25. So I keep those low because I know that this is a 200 level, and you've probably not done, well, you have. You've probably not done this kind of analysis before, so I don't want to like kill people with a grade. So it's a lower scored assignment, and I think it is one of the harder assignments for students who haven't taken a film analysis class or a class where we do film analysis, or even like done analysis, like literary analysis in a long time. Like if you haven't analyzed a poem or a book or anything like that in a long time, you're like, I don't even know. But this gives me an idea of like where everybody's at. That said, people did really well. So it was majority A's and B's, which is really great. So that's what I'm looking for. But if you got lower than that, or if you got a score that you were like, ooh, I don't know how that happened, come to office hours, because I'm always happy to talk about this. You know, I am looking for complexity. I am looking for you to really utilize the terminology correctly and things like that. And I do have feedback on the essay itself, so you can always look at the essay itself, not just my final comments, and you'll see what I have to say. If you're finding that your style, and this is where it gets complicated, I want you to have your own voice, but I also want to be able to read it. So like if your style is one of the issues that you're having, you know, like, oh my gosh, I am just crafting comma splices all over the place and she's getting annoyed with me, then come to office hours. Like that's something I can easily help you with. And also we have a writing center. The writing center is in TAWS. They have no idea what you guys are writing about because they have not taken this class. In fact, they are more geared towards like English 101 and those kinds of classes over in the English department. But they can help you with organization and stylistic issues if you're just running into some issues that, you know, keep cropping up over and over again. I typically, it's just, you know, like the matter between an A and an A+, you know, like if you've got all the content in there, but if it starts really impacting readability, that's when I say like, okay, well, let's work with this a little bit more. So that's where style comes in. But don't do grammar. Don't go and like sell it to somebody else to like fix it for you, because I want you guys to be able to do this on your own. So that's, and people have been doing that, so I've been really pleased. So thank you guys. Okay, so, and I know like, Danielle, I will get to yours. Yeah, some of you, the Google Doc link came late or it wasn't open for me, so I know some of you got emails over the break because that was when I was grading. I was like, oh yeah, I can't open these. So they will get graded, you will get those grades back. I think there's only like a few of you that are left, so it stresses me out when I don't have it all done, so I will get it done. Okay, any questions about that or your next essay, which is not due for like several weeks? Okay. For your next essay, though, if you do want to meet with me during office hours, I'm available. Oh, yeah, Clark. Yes.
Is there no discussion thing this week?
No. Yeah, you didn't miss anything, so you're good. You're like, oh, crap. Yeah, no discussion for this week. We pick up again next week with Bonnie and Clyde. Okay, so then let's jump into it. The exam, I have it done. It's right here, and I won't show it to you. Okay, there you go. I have 10 short answer questions, so you'll just add your response into the, onto the actual essay or exam itself. Bullet points are great because that forces you to write short answers. There are some of you, no matter how much I say, write a short answer, you write books for everything, and you fill up the margins and you fill up the back of the paper. You don't need to. Like, you just need to answer, and that's enough. Like, you don't need to go beyond and show me just how brilliant you are and how much you remember. And I know you remember a lot, but short answer, definitely. And then the last part, so that's the first part. The last part is a choice of 2 out of 3 paragraph answer questions. So you'll look at these and choose the 2 that you think you can write the most about, or you can most effectively answer in a paragraph or 2. Okay? All right, so that's the exam. Let's jump into it. So that does need to be written in a paragraph form, but not an essay. Just a paragraph or 2, and you're done. Okay, so let's begin at the beginning. The first term that we really explored, and you weren't even here to talk to me or talk it through with me, was monomyth? How does it compare to the American monomyth? Because there might be something in an exam about these definitions. So classical monomyth, let's begin there. And I had that nifty little picture, right, the circle, to show the monomythic journey. Yeah, Addison.
The next one is the hero's journey.
Yep.
Typically, I don't know, you have a hero living in wherever he's living, and then there's some sort of disruption which causes him to cross the threshold, leave his world, usually meet with a mentor of some sort, and then he ends up coming back to where he originally started, having fixed the problem, usually with some sort of prize or given.
Yes, good. And I like that when we think about it as a circle, he returns back to the home, right? He comes back to where he began with some newfound understanding or a gift, like you said, a boon, right? It could be like Luke Skywalker coming back with knowledge of the Force, right? Although, I don't know, like, if he actually comes, he stays within the galaxy. I don't know. But, like, he has the knowledge of the Force. So the hero's journey really is this kind of journey of growth, right? Like they go through trials and tribulations and they grow and become the hero that they're supposed to be, and then they can come back into the community and share whatever it is that they learn. Maybe the boon is a wife, maybe the boon is whatever it may be, right? But that's the hero's journey. Now what about the American monomyth? So remember, Joseph Campbell, hero's journey, it's repeated in all of these ancient texts and all of these older works that we see, even like Homer and things like that. We see this hero's journey repeated over and over again across cultures. And then he said, it died. We no longer have that in contemporary culture. Joseph Campbell argued that, it went by the way of the focus on democratic individualism and all of that stuff. But he said that we lost the hero's journey. We lost that cultural kind of touchstone. And then Jewett and Lawrence said, no, wait a second. Got one that's particular to the United States. So what makes the American monomyth different? Okay. I will call on you a lot today. So.
I can't do it like in order, but I know that the main difference is normally the hero in the American monomyth is more secluded from society.
Yes, good.
And they normally do not return to the monomythic Eden after the journey's over,
Right.
because they're always alienated. Like especially the one that I always think of from movies that we've watched is
Ethan.
Ethan.
Yeah, were you going to say the Outsiders?
I was gonna say no. I was just the Searchers.
Yeah, the Searchers.
I knew
yeah.
it was like a one-word thing. I just couldn't think of it.
Yeah, you got it. Yeah, Ethan of the Searchers, right? They recede into obscurity because they can't be a part of that community, or they kind of like hide their heroism within the community, like what we see with David Dunn. Some of you analyzed David Dunn.
A lot of it is also like war. Like a lot of them are like war heroes or like people who have gone through conflict previously, which makes them more secluded. Like Ethan was in a war. I think there was another one that was in No Country for Old Men. He was in a war as well.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
it's like a lot of them are like they've already experienced something or before the story started.
Yeah, they're already fully formed heroes, right? Like we don't see them growing in the course of the story in the American monomyth because they already are heroes. They might change a little bit, like Ethan decides not to kill Debbie, right? Yeah.
They're always trying to go from one conflict to the next, typically either with little or no break,
Okay.
and that's just how they operate.
Yeah, and I wouldn't put that in the no break, like at least in terms of the American
Yeah.
monomyth, if we're just looking at it as like Ethan's story, right? We don't know.
Yeah.
But you're right, like a lot of these heroes will kind of keep going. Because the monomythic Eden is always going to be threatened in some way, right? And it's all about that monomythic Eden and that threat to the monomythic Eden. You don't have that in the classical monomyth. Your classical monomyth, that society might be perfectly fine, right? But you aren't, or there's something missing, or that, like, if you think about The Hobbit, right? Like, what's the name of their, like, little...
The Shire.
Yeah, the Shire's beautiful and lovely. Like, there's not, like, an issue there, right? So they go out of that in order to go on that journey. So they are definitely within that classical monomyth. But the American monomyth, that monomythic Eden is threatened, right? So threatened monomythic Eden, the hero recedes into obscurity. Addison, did you have any other?
No.
All right, good. And what counts for what America? Like, why is our contemporary, how does this speak to American culture? Just like one way. Yeah,
Individualism?
yeah, absolutely. Yeah, the focus on individualism. Maybe one more way. We've always been kind of seeking out that monomythic Eden, right? Even like the origins of the United States, when we think about the pilgrims coming to this land, right? Seeking out that monomythic Eden, and then later on, the movement west, and always these attempts to create this kind of Edenic space. All right, good. Okay, so Unbreakable. That was the first movie that you guys watched, and that was our superhero genre. So let me just move down because I want to make sure that I address all of these things. So what about superheroes do we need to remember? And they tend to align with the American monomyth, although I said like maybe Wonder Woman, like we could see some aspects of the classical monomyth in the film Wonder Woman, but when it comes to Unbreakable, it's definitely an American monomyth, right? Like there's not, he is the same boring guy from the beginning to the end of that movie, other than the fact that he becomes a hero, right? He figures that he needs to do that in order to be happy. But what about superheroes? What are some characteristics? Yeah.
They usually have some sort of power or ability that sets them apart from the rest of society.
Yes, right? Which really aligns with that American monomyth, right? They are separate from. All right, what else? What are some other characteristics of the superhero? Yeah.
I think they usually like hide with their.
Yes. They have these weird alter egos. Absolutely. And we see that with David. Any other characteristics of the superhero? Yeah, Gabe.
There's normally some sort of like love interest, whether it's female or male. It's just there's always normally someone that's like the love interest, like pushing them or like
Good.
influencing them to like do what they do.
Excellent, right? Now, when it's male and the female is the love interest, what tends to happen with those female characters? Does anybody remember? I gave you like a little, yeah.
They're like overshadowed.
Yeah, the women in refrigerators. Was that what you're gonna say too?
I was gonna say, most of the time, they're like, at least for the older shows, they're like kind of like a damsel in distress.
Yes, yeah. We're really kind of fixing within those patriarchal norms. Excellent. And women in refrigerators kind of emphasizes that patriarchal norm that we find in comic books. Yeah.
They usually tend to operate at least a little bit outside the law.
Yes,
Like
good.
with good ideals, obviously intent, but like
Yeah.
again, like this one, he like breaks into a guy's house.
Yes.
Definitely.
And this is where we get that concern over superheroes and fascism, which we're going to explore later on in the semester more. You know, like, are these superheroes fascist? Are they deciding for us what's good for us? Are we losing kind of our democracy by having this one person take charge? And clearly they have some sort of inherent ability to figure out what's best for us. I'm sorry, Tipton.
I just wanted to add on to that. It's like even though they're vigilantes, we're not really supposed to question their authority either.
Excellent.
They're right.
They're right. And they are, again, going back to the American monomyth, they're going to align that monomythic Eden back to the status quo. And one of the concerns that we brought up is, well, what is the status quo? Like in Unbreakable, what's the status quo? Is it a good status quo for somebody like Elijah? Yeah, right? I mean, what's the problem for Elijah?
He's just handy capable and like I think like he can't really experience life like normal. Like I guess normal like he can't really like do stuff that most people can do and like I guess that's the reason that he's a villain is because he can't do the stuff that he wants to do, so he has to take his energy elsewhere.
Right. So these films seem to really reflect hegemonic ideologies, right? About race, about gender, and about disability, right? And in that case, rather than saying like, oh, what's wrong with our society that we need to fix in order for Elijah to feel like he's a part of it, Elijah's a villain, right? And so that's where it becomes kind of concerning, right? And even at the end of Unbreakable, when David reveals to Joseph his heroism, and then his wife, who's like anti-violence, is just like forgotten in the background, right? We can see not only is that very patriarchal, right? She's no longer important. She's just pushed to the side. But also the fact that she and her anti-violence is deemed not something valuable, right? That instead it's his violent actions as a hero that we support. And I don't know how many of you support that, right? Like, when you're watching the movie, you do. You're like, yeah, go kick ass. Good job, David, right? And shut up, Audrey. You're just a nag, right? And that's how we're kind of led to view this, which is, slightly troubling for some of us, because I am definitely anti-violence. Okay, anything else that we need to remember about Unbreakable? Other than, it's a good movie, it's fun to watch. Yeah. But definitely we have our villain who's set apart. Villains have very clear agendas. They are active. They are active agents. They push things, they move things, they change things. Heroes are passive. They come in and they fix things after, but only once the hero or once the villain has disrupted the monomythic Eden. We don't have heroes, and this was something that was brought up in Fingeroff's piece. We don't have heroes that are like on the Union line protesting, right? Like, you don't have superheroes. Like, David's not going to go out and even try to like protest his low pay. Instead, he accidentally gets a raise, right? But that's not something that matters to him. And I think that goes back to Tipton, what you were saying too. Like, they're just not, heroes don't change the status quo, right? And that can be really troubling because the status quo may not be great, right? Okay, so that might appear on your exam. Okay, next one. Next movie, next stuff. We jumped into the Western, which again really aligns with the American monomyth. And you guys had to read Ride, Boldly Ride, which was like 4 pages. And I know all of you read it because it was like 4 pages. It was very short. What are the characteristics of the Western hero? So what are some of them? Daniel, you're looking at me. So what's one? Just one characteristic of the hero of the Western genre.
He's like the good bad guy.
You got it, yes. If you only remember that, you guys got one, right? He's a good bad guy. Which kind of speaks to this, like, going back to Addison and the superhero, this ability to go outside of the bounds of, society and law and be willing to do things that are kind of gross, kind of bad, kind of things that we find distasteful in order to save us, in order to protect us, yeah.
The good bad guy took place some sort of like war fighting experience, like in the Searchers, or
Yes.
the Civil War. Sometimes it's the Vietnam War, or whatever, depending on how you're looking at
Yes.
the character and how you classify the wars.
And it's very revealing which war they're in, right? So Gabe bringing up Ethan being in the Civil War, right? Because he wasn't fighting for the Union. They often were fighting for the Confederates and the Westerns. Like, that was just, that's where we were in the 30s and 40s and 50s when these movies were coming out. We were like, oh, that's okay. But when we look at it, it complicates his character, right? All right, and then Vietnam War, we saw that when we're looking at Llewellyn. That's his training ground, and how does that speak to Llewellyn? How does that complicate our view of Llewellyn? Anna, was that a hand? No. Okay, Gabe.
It was a bad war. Right?
Yeah.
So I guess it conflicts with he definitely experienced stuff that shaped him and scarred him,
Yeah.
which makes his character more flawed and
Yes.
also more confused and trying to figure out what's going on throughout the whole thing with him. But I think it's different between wars. There's different wars that we perceive as good wars and bad wars. So it's
And this is I'm using gross generalizations, right? That we perceive World War II as the good war or Vietnam as the bad war, right? Like, it's gross generalizations based on kind of the popular consensus. But you're right, it changes how we view these characters. All right, good. Any other characteristics of the Western hero that we should keep in mind? Their weapon? Yeah.
Usually it's guns, which is also a symbol of like a phallic sort
Yes.
of symbol, which is a thing. They also usually have like the white cowboy hat, and not having a white hat can sometimes symbolize.
Yeah, which is such a trope, right? But yes, it makes us think a little bit more about these characters. Good. They have intuition, right? Real keen intuition. Yeah. Tipton.
In Wonder Woman, World War I, it's it's kind of used as a neutral war. It's not a good or a bad war.
Yeah.
Where would you say that's classified as?
Oh, a good or bad war? think a neutral complex war. Yeah, in our popular imagination. World War II was like the good war. Everybody needs to go and do this. But World War I, I mean, even just how the war started was so complex and confusing. So, and people were dismal. Like nobody wanted to be in war, especially like, so we were in World War I, and then we entered into the Great Depression. So everybody's like, oh, good God, like what next? And then we're like, World War II, here we go. So I shouldn't smile about that because that's awful. All right, but yeah, complex. I think just complex and ambiguous is that. All right, so the Searchers. We talked about how this was potentially John Ford's attempt to kind of revisit his earlier representations of Native Americans. What are the stereotypical representations of Native Americans, like in Western films? Like, how are they typically presented? Yeah.
Wild, savage, living off the land.
Yeah, absolutely. And even just like more generally in film, often set in the past, right? Even just like my ChatGPT example that I give you guys where I'm like, Native American in New York City, and it's like full regalia. It's like, no, Native Americans don't just go around wearing like full, cultural touchstones, right? Native Americans look like everybody else when they're wandering through New York City, but yeah.
I was gonna say they're also traditionally not like an individual villain, they're
Yeah.
more of a mass force to try and detract from like their individuality and their story and personality.
You got it, yeah. So we have this kind of like almost a horde, right? Which we see also reflected in some of the war movies, right? So that, excellent. So the villain is very much presented one-dimensionally. They often don't have any cultural touchstones or language. So the Searchers, at least on a cursory level, is trying to do something different, maybe slightly more progressive. Because again, John Ford's allegiance was always with the Native Americans because he was Irish. I don't know how. He did all sorts of, I mean, it's apologies when you're old and you just feel really crappy about things that you did earlier. And you're like, oh, no, I always felt this way. So what did he do in that film that was different than what we have seen in other Western, or than what we would have expected to see in classic Western films in terms of his representation of the Native Americans? Gabe.
He gave the Scar more complexity than the average Native American, despite not really giving other speaking roles except to the one the one woman. But then she
Does
really,
Look ever talk?
not really,
Yeah.
but she at least has a name. You know what I'm saying? Like,
Yeah.
but I think they give Scar more complexity by making him speak English a little
Yes.
bit, and that whole conversation in the tent with Ethan is like really impactful.
Yeah.
Kind of de-represent what they normally are. Like kind of.
Add complexity.
Yeah.
Like, you killed my sons. Like, your people killed my sons. I am now, seeking vengeance on that. Like, there's more complexity. And it also is kind of vilifying the cavalry in that film, right? We even see that scene where Look was killed. And we recognize that was the cavalry that came in. Cavalry. I always say it incorrectly, and nobody ever fixes that. Anytime I'm in the class, everybody's like, whatever, professor, just keep going. Cavalry. Yeah.
I think also, in addition, like there is a moment where they're like trading with some Native Americans. Like I said, you have Look, who's like, I guess in our relationship
Yes,
with him.
yeah.
And then also one of our heroes is like partially Native
Yeah,
American.
you
So
got it.
it's
Martin?
an attempt to be like, maybe they're not all bad.
Maybe. Okay, and then how is all this undercut? So how does he undercut all these moments that you brought up that could be, all right, let's start with Scar. How is it undercut? The fact that we have Scar, and even like have him kind of mirror Ethan, we'll talk about that mirroring in a second. How do we undercut any progressive statement that character might make? Who plays Scar?
Not a Native American.
No, yeah.
It's like a white German
Yeah,
guy.
it's a white guy with blue eyes, right? So, which also, I mean, the blue eyes help us connect back to Ethan, who was known, John Wayne was known for his blue eyes. So it's kind of, it draws that parallel, but even so, right? It's a really troubling representation. And then what else about Scar? How else is his figure undercut? Yeah.
He dies.
Yeah, he dies. Yeah. And he's like raping people, right? Like Debbie, like she's one of his wives. We don't see that as a positive. So, and even the women that have been in that encampment, how are they? The white women that Ethan finds after, yeah.
Mentally unstable.
Yes.
Like they've gone through a lot of trauma.
Yeah.
Can't cope.
Yeah. So while Debbie gets out, like and manages to like escape and seems okay, right? These other women don't seem okay. So like even that's undercut, right? So they're still presented as rather savage. Okay. What about Ethan though? So how does he also work to kind of complicate things? What's he like? Well, he's definitely, Daniel, going back to you, he's the good bad guy, right? Clearly. But what else makes us a little troubled by Ethan? Yeah.
There's just some questionings about certain things that he does. So like, one, how does he know all this about the Native Americans?
Yeah.
Two, like he wants to kill Debbie for a really long time.
Yeah.
There's some debate if he killed the other sister,
Lucy,
Lucy
yes.
earlier in the film. Like,
Yeah. And some of you didn't agree with me, but I still think he did. Yeah, so like, what is he violent? Is he aggressive? And then that mirroring shows, again, that maybe the whites are not as, are just as culpable as the Native Americans, right? That there's problems on all sides. And then Ethan has the hots for Martha, and Martha has the hots for Ethan, right? And then we have this weird thing where Scar clearly was with Martha, right? The fact that she wasn't wearing a dress, so Ethan picks up a dress, tells us that potentially Scar raped Martha before he killed her, right? Or at some point raped her, right? And so that too kind of, is Scar acting out Ethan's inner desires, right? Is he this kind of foil to Ethan, right? So that's an interesting component of this as well. Okay, I think, and we talked about like just, Ethan being a complex protagonist, right? And if he's ultimately the hero, or is Martin the hero? Because Martin's the one that kills Scar ultimately, right? He gets that final moment. And then Ethan comes and scalps him, which is not so powerful of a conclusion there. Okay, so that's the searcher. So keep all of that in mind. Why would we want to kill off Martha? Not me. But why does Martha need to die? Remember, Martha again is the woman that Ethan's brother's married to. Yeah.
she's technically not like this paragon of virtue or whatever. She's having this kind of like affair with Ethan, and I say affair very loosely.
Yeah, we don't know
whatever.
it. Yeah.
But in turn, it's also he can't really get the girl at the end because if he does, then that's really messy and complicated.
Okay. All right. Definitely. What else? What else is the problem with Martha? Yeah.
It can also give him motivation to like go and like
Seek
find-
out.
Yeah.
Yeah. So spending all that time to kill Scar ultimately, or to defeat Scar, so the anger there. She's also powerful. So remember that first scene where she's the one that is looking at Ethan, and the bearer of the look. This is just classic Hollywood film. Is the one that has the power, right? And that's when we get into the detective films, we see that as well. The person who's looking, the person that has the power of that voyeurism, the one that our gaze is aligned with, has power. And she's the one that's doing the looking at the beginning. And that's a threat to Ethan and his patriarchal masculinity. So even in that regard, she's a threat. So we ultimately get rid of that threat. So maybe Scar is acting out his innermost desires. Get rid of the threat that she represents, so I don't have to deal with that. Okay, postmodern film. So we talked about neoclassical westerns and postmodern westerns. Just as a aside, neoclassical, I will not ask you about this on the exam. I don't think I had it up here. Right. Nope, just postmodern. But neoclassical is just like new classical. So it's like just revisiting the old tropes that we had in classic westerns. And one example of a neoclassical film would be like the resurgence of westerns in the 1980s that were all about like drugs and drug cartels and things like that, right? So no longer are they Native Americans, but it's still the same old tropes that we saw before. Postmodern is what I want us to focus on. So what are the characteristics of postmodern film more generally, and then how does No Country for Old Men kind of take on some of those characteristics? Okay, one characteristic, yeah.
So they usually apply parody or prestige to try and combat certain things that are like traditional, like master narratives or things that are seen in the original version.
And even just if it has parody, right? It could be a postmodern film. Even if it's not doing anything, it's just parody, right? So parody is over exaggeration for comedic effect, right? And then we've got pastiche. What is pastiche? But by the way, was there any parody in No Country? I was like, I don't know. I always feel a little iffy about that. Did you find like there was a moment where it was over exaggerated for comedic effect and you were like, knee slapper?
Not for comedic effect, but I just think the villain is very over exaggerated.
Okay,
I
yeah.
don't think it's comedic. I just think it's ridiculous.
Okay.
Like, I think the weapon is ridiculous.
Yeah.
I think certain things like that. Is
Yeah. I like that. Yeah, ridiculous. So yeah.
Yeah, I think there is a bit of parody because, like, Javier Bardem's character is, like, you know, villainous, but he's also somewhat funny. I
Yeah.
don't know if it's because of the internet, because there's a lot of memes about Anton Chigurh, but
So you can't like separate the two now.
yeah,
right?
I just can't. I find it, like, funny every time he comes on the screen, just
Yeah.
because you recognize so many of the memes from the internet.
All right, yeah.
His hair was funny, but also maybe potentially the almost like the fourth wall breaking, because it's not necessarily funny, but it kind of like pulls you out of the moment.
When do you see the fourth wall breaking?
In that moment when he's going into the well, it's playing on like you know it's a film, but it's when I can't remember anyone's names. The sheriff goes into the room, and then you think he's in the room, but he's not in the room.
And maybe not the fourth wall breaking, but that meta moment
Yeah.
where it's like a film about film. And actually, that's another characteristic of postmodern film, right? Meta. It's films talking about films, right? And that's a meta moment. So you think because of the cross cutting, right, between the different scenes, right, with Javier Bardem's Sugar standing behind the door with his gun, that he's going to kill Ed Tom Bell, and then when Ed Tom Bell opens the door, nobody's there. It's like he's a ghost, right? That's a meta moment. It's like, hey, this is a movie, just so you know. And we can do whatever the hell we want. And maybe he is a ghost. And it's interesting that Ed Tom Bell, right before that, had said, maybe he's a ghost, I don't know. And then we get that scene. Okay, good. Yeah, parody, maybe not so much, but definitely, except in memes, but definitely pastiche and meta. And what is pastiche, just to make sure everybody's clear? Yeah.
Referencing other films.
Yes. So combining and taking bits and pieces from other works or other genres. What other genres do you see, Jacob, in this movie? So it's a Western, definitely, but what else?
I know,
I know. Somebody can, like, step into. You can't remember one. Yeah, Andrew? Yeah, it's like a mystery. Like, what is he? Right? A horror film? I feel like it's very much like a horror film. You know, especially that meta moment where you're like, maybe he is a ghost. And then when he's, like, wandering off into the suburbia with his, like, arm, bones sticking out. I mean, all sorts of gross stuff. So definitely that. We could also see it as like a 1980s drug cartel movie, right? It's pulling from that as well. Yeah.
Maybe a bit of like cops and robbers, just in
Yeah.
the sense that he stole the money and people are chasing
Yeah.
after him.
Absolutely, right? So definitely pulling from all these different genres. Excellent, good. All right. Master narratives are another quality of the postmodern film. So this kind of dismantling of master narratives. And just master narratives are like these kinds of stories that we all tell, right? That we all hold to be true. The myth of the Old West, right? And this film really works to dismantle that. We have no heroes, right? Maybe Carla Jean, but we don't even know if she ended up being a hero at the end, right? She might have called it. So even that, we don't know. Llewellyn and Ed Tom, they don't fit the trope of the heroes of the Old West because they don't win, right? Ed Tom, why doesn't he win? Like, he seems like he fits, you know, the boldly ride stereotype, or not stereotype, but definition. But what happens with Ed Tom? Yeah.
Doesn't catch it.
Yeah, he doesn't catch him. Did you want to add to that? and even being stuck in a past that never really existed. Come on, Anton. Uncle Ellis even tells us, he's like, there is nothing new here. It's always been rough. It's always been a bad place. There is no monomythic Eden. What are you talking about, right? And then Llewellyn, why doesn't he win? Yeah, we'll start here and then.
It's like he dies, and not only does he die, he doesn't even get shot by like our main villain.
No! And like you guys, some of you didn't even realize it was him. You just were like, who is that? It didn't even look like him. Yeah, Colin?
I was gonna say the same thing. At the end of the day, Anton doesn't even kill him. It's like the cartel that kills him.
Yes. But he is very intuitive, right? Like he fits a lot of the characteristics that you guys gave about the Western hero. Intuitive, he's got his rifle, he's good with a gun, he's a war hero, yes, right? Like all of these things, or hero, I mean we don't know, but he went to war. All these things that fit within the stereotypes of the Western hero, the characteristics of the Western hero, and yet even that's not enough, right? Yeah.
He also fails to protect his wife.
Yes. Yes, right? And he's selfish, right? He's like, oh no, she'll be fine, right? Like clearly sugar is dangerous. But his intuitiveness is always something that really sticks out to me. You know, he knew that there was going to be a last man standing when we first meet him, and he goes and finds the money. And he knew that it existed, right? And he followed the trail, he got there. He is smart and intuitive, and that doesn't save him in this world, right? Okay, good. So we definitely see the master narrative of the myth of the Old West being deconstructed, hero and villain, that binary. So remember that another quality of postmodern films is kind of to deconstruct or trouble binaries. And you can definitely see the hero-villain binary trouble. Does Anton Chigurh have characteristics that align him with the hero of the Western film? I wouldn't ask it as, yes, yeah, it wasn't a rhetorical question. Definitely, right? Yeah, and then they click being elusive. Yes, yeah, so he is kind of an outsider, right? Like, he himself, very intuitive, right? Yes.
We're going with the American monomyth. He shows up in the beginning, at the end, he literally leaves into the middle of suburbia and fades back into obscurity.
Yes, he does. Like, a lot of these character traits that we would associate with the hero, we actually see Chigurh taking on, which is really troubling. Okay, so we've got all of that. The monomythic Eden, though. So even if we look at another master narrative being the American monomyth, how does it deconstruct that? What about the monomythic Eden? Is there a monomythic Eden? I'm saying that no, right? What is the U.S. like? It's complicated, yeah. Yeah, it's complicated, it's corrupted, right? You've got those boys at the beginning, or not the beginning, but midway through, that are all about money. Like, how much will you give me for the beer? Give him your shirt, give him the beer, right? It's all about money and capitalism and wealth. And the boys at the end, also, we see them kind of fighting over the $50. Yeah.
I think it also dismantles sort of like the narrative like Mexico in these films.
Yes,
in turn
good.
also makes America much more complicated, and then as we're saying, like nothing's really changed, like what you were saying to the sheriff, it's like, okay, well, was there really a monomythic Eden? Is what they're living in right now technically the monomythic Eden, even if it's not a good place to be necessarily?
Yeah, and Uncle Ellis would say, no, there never was, right? This place has always been hard on people, right? It's never, hasn't changed, right? But I like that. It also dismantles kind of that U.S.-Mexico binary that we've crafted in films too, where Mexico is this like an illicit criminal place, right? And here it's like all the criminal activity is happening in the U.S., not in Mexico. And that led me to one of the readings that I didn't assign, but I actually had on that you guys could check out. You know, what is Anton Chigurh, right? Maybe he is a representative of us, of the United States, right? This kind of imperialist notion, right? Coming in and saying, you will believe what I believe, and you will live by my rules, right? And that kind of speaks to this infrequent reference to Vietnam, right? Because, of course, Vietnam is playing a role in this. Like in the background, we know that Llewellyn was a Vietnam War veteran, and then we also know that Chigurh is around the same age as Llewellyn, and there's a comparison between them. In that one scene where Llewellyn says, hold still, right, when he's shooting the buck, And you also have Sugar say, hold still, when he uses that cattle thing on the guy. So there's connections being drawn between these two characters, and maybe Vietnam is this kind of like reference, right? And even just the confusion of Vietnam, right? Like, who is the bad guy? Who's the good guy? Like, how are we supposed to fight this? People using weaponry that wasn't, things that were brand new, that would never been used in wars before, right? Yeah.
I remember why I remember this, that article referred to sugar as a corrupting force of evil, and I think that just really
Yeah,
stuck with me.
yeah. Yeah, and I think even if we don't see him like quite that, like the bubonic plague or corrupting force of evil, does he represent kind of this, what happens when a powerful country is in another, is trying to take over, like what does that do, right? And you guys don't have to go in that direction, but if there's a question about how this relates to the Vietnam War, then, and I promise it won't be just this movie, but if there's a question about the Vietnam War, then you might think about that. Okay, we moved on to the tan. So let's talk about that. Now, I began this by just saying, like, the Office of War Information during World War II was very hands-on and very concerned about what the media was creating. So we had a lot of censorship. We had the Bureau of Motion, Bureau of Motion Pictures. That was like an offshoot of the Office of War Information that was specifically geared towards making sure that the movies that were being created in Hollywood were going to showcase the war in a truthful manner. Yeah, we didn't get that. So instead we get the tan, which is not very truthful. And by the way, the other thing the Bureau of Motion Pictures was supposed to do was help Hollywood's pictures make sure that they were going to help win the war, right? Like, it was all about, what can we do to help win the war? So we discussed the difference between how, during World War II, villains were presented. So we had the Germans, we had the Italians, and we had the Japanese in films, right? Those were the primary villains that we would find in films. How were the Italians and the Germans presented in comparison to the Japanese? And how do you account for that difference? I mean, they were all villains, yeah.
The Germans and Italians were presented as more together and thoughtful and like smarter and like less savage.
Less savage. That's what I want you guys to hold on to, because they were all smart.
Like
Right.
different smart is
Yeah.
what I mean. Is like it's not like they were more organized. Is what I mean.
Okay.
They weren't they were regimented attacks and they weren't like guerrilla warfare. Kind
Yes.
Of thing.
So it's a different kind of
Warfare,
warfare. Yes, and more savage. So the one of the quotes I gave you was that the Germans and the Italians were still human, and the Japanese were inhuman, right? Like they were, and we see that in these films. All right, Colin and then Addison.
There's also like the sense of like the Western way of war versus the Eastern way of war, and how American film portrays, the European ways of war as more honorable
Yeah.
than the way the Japanese fought.
Yeah, and that goes back to that kind of like concerns about guerrilla warfare and very savage and all that. Excellent, good. Yeah, Addison.
I was gonna say, this also kind of presents the Orientalist
Yes.
view of especially like civilized versus
Yes,
uncivilized.
this is where it all comes from, right? So when we think about why the Japanese were portrayed in such a way, now one of the reasons could be, well, they bombed Pearl Harbor, and I get that, but beyond that, I mean, especially knowing that kind of Orientalist ideology was cycling in our culture for so long, we were inevitably going to view the Japanese through that lens, right? So what is Orientalism? So Edward Said coined this term. He was focusing specifically on like the Middle East and Iran and Iraq. Those were the places that he was focusing on. But what is Orientalism? If we apply it to even Japan. Yeah,
Like how Western culture stereotypes the East.
good. And I like that you said how Western culture stereotypes the East. It's the Western view of the East, right? So in that view, the West perceives the East as being less than, as being uncivilized, as being feminine, as being exotic, right? And the West is then superior to the East, right? And what was the intention of these Orientalist ideologies? What was the purpose of these when we started to see them really come out in the 1700s and really come to the fore in literature and art and writing and text and all of those things? Yeah.
It gave people an excuse to take over
Yes.
and become imperialist powers.
Yes. Yeah, it excused imperialist nations from going into the East and taking over, right? I am going to take over India because the people in this country are uncivilized, right? They can't take care of themselves. They need the West to take care of them. So it was used as an excuse. And then it is something that kind of reappears in our more contemporary films. Like even with American Sniper, we talked about Orientalism in that relationship. The other thing that's important to note when we're thinking about Bataan is this history of yellow peril fears. So not only did we have like concern over Orientalism, but this also harkened to this fear of Eastern nations changing us and coming in and taking over and changing us. And that was something that we saw really reflected in a lot of our policies, right? So in the 1800s, we had in 1882 the Chinese Exclusion Act. I know, Tipton, you heard all this in my other class, but I can't get away from it. So we had like the Chinese Exclusion Act, and then we had the Gentleman's Agreement in the early 1900s. All these immigration policies that were like, nope, we're not going to allow people from different Asian countries to immigrate into the United States because of our fears about these nations. And ultimately in 1924, with the Immigration Act of 1924, we said no to everybody in Asia. We were like, nope, we're closing the border. Nobody can come in. And it wasn't until the 1960s that we finally had quotas that allowed for people to come in. So we had a lot of history here. Okay, so Bataan. How does Bataan present the Japanese? Yeah.
I'm gonna say slightly different with the spirit of the other is that, which didn't happen in World War II, at least for the Americans, is you had this group of people who were from all over America, of all different American nationalities.
Yeah.
You had this melting pot of a regiment against this like very brutal hiding in the bush, like literally moving bushes troop
Yes.
that is coming against them. And
Subhuman,
all of,
right?
Yep, and all of America needs to come together and work together to fight this evil, even if that's not like all the troops are still segregated.
Right, excellent. And I realized that my quote was wrong. Not the Japanese were subhuman. The Germans and the Italians were inhuman. So subhuman was worse. All right, Tipton.
I think that Vietnam is viewed like they're viewed very similarly to Native Americans.
Oh, the Japanese.
Or Japanese.
Yes, I think that's a great point. Yeah, they were. We get a lot of long shots. So Bataan, right? We get a lot of long shots of the Japanese in Bataan, and they are part of nature in the same way that Native Americans are often represented in Western films. So it really takes a lot of those tropes, and it clearly is the American monomyth again, right? The monomythic Eden is being threatened by this villain, right? Who is really savage in this, right? Now, what explains or accounts for the savagery? So we had Epps, who is almost decapitated. I mean, yes, like we don't see it all, but like he gets a sword to the neck, right? And then as you rub your neck, and then we got I can't remember, but one of them is hung from the tree. I can't remember his name. I know it's in my notes. I'm not going to look it up, but he's hung from the tree. It's gonna bother me. It's okay. By the way, they're all non-white characters, right? So we have the African-American character that's almost decapitated, and then we have the two Filipino characters. One's hung from the tree, almost naked, right? And then we have the other one that was killed by the samurai sword, so we just see the sword sticking out from the ground. So what do we account for? Yes, it presents them as savages, but what else is being done here? Especially hanging, decapitating. Asha, you're looking at me, yeah?
They just show the deaths of the non-white characters
Yeah. Why?
because
What's happening in in the United States at the same time as World War II. And I won't pick on you, but yes, it's so important that they're the deaths of an African American, yeah.
The civil rights movement.
We haven't gotten there yet. We're like starting in the 1950s, so we're gonna get there, and there's a reason why we're gonna get there.
Red Scare,
No, Jim Crow.
Jim Crow.
Jim Crow and lynching of African Americans in the United States, right? They're being brutally massacred in the United States, and so then, no, we don't do that. It's the Japanese, right? So this film is trying to distract the audience from what's actually happening in the United States. These, really unjust, racist moves, and saying like, no, it's the Japanese. Well, don't look over here at what's happening in the United States. Look over here at what the Japanese are doing. And that speaks to just also this weird, diverse unit that wouldn't have existed because, of course, we didn't have integrated units at this time, right? We didn't allow for that. We had segregation in our military until 1948, I believe it was. Don't write that down. I think it was. Look in your notes earlier, because I'm not going to look at my notes. But we didn't have integrated units, and so rather than exploring all that, we're like, no, everybody gets along. Everybody's coming together for the war effort. Okay, one more thing about the hero of World War II. What are some other characteristics? What's the hero of a World War II film like? Yeah.
He's always in the right and doing a good thing.
Yeah, always in the right and eager to keep fighting, almost suicidal. And we see that in Bataan, right? I mean, they are basically going to keep fighting until they die, right? Because they are fighting for the just cause. And it's all about the group. Yes, I know the sergeant is like kind of more important than everybody else, like because you spend more time looking at him. But really, it's all about the group coming together and fighting together. It's a group. When we get to American Sniper, it's an individual. Okay, so I want you to keep that in mind, that contrast. Why is it a group in World War II? And a diverse group. We already talked about why it's diverse, but why does it need to be the group coming together? Yeah.
Because it's supposed to represent like all of America coming together to fight.
Yeah, you got it. Like we were all supposed to be fighting for this war effort in whatever way we could. And so the films really reflected that by having these combat units, right, as our heroes. Okay, so then we get to Vietnam and those war films. I said that we don't really have as many heroes of the Vietnam War film. Instead, we could call them tragic heroes or tragic victims, right? Tragic victims really works well to show that the war was a troubled war. The war was a problematic war. So you get a lot of that during the Vietnam War. And then we get to the War on Terror. And what do we do with that? So with the Afghanistan War, there's more of a clear connection between 9/11 and going to war. And then with the Iraq War, that's when things get more complicated. And I gave you guys, I think, a statistic, like it was like over 70% of the population that was, and I know these statistics, you're like, well, who did they poll? And I don't know. And I don't even know where I got this, but it was like a huge portion of the population eventually was really antagonistic against the Iraq War because it wasn't a clear rationale why we were there, right? Like we couldn't see clearly what the purpose of our troops there was other than war on terror. And the films reflected that. It's a complicated war, right? So we saw that in a lot of war films that came out, except American Sniper. Okay, so this is where things get really interesting. So how is a war hero presented in American Sniper? And I want you to focus on the individual too. Why is it Chris Kyle? Yeah.
Well, he's just like a regular guy.
Okay.
Like, I mean, he,
Is he regular though?
in the beginning is what I mean.
Okay,
Like, he
alright.
starts off as just like this guy who has no experience like in the war, and then something happens where he realizes that he needs to like defend his country,
Okay.
and he realizes he has this skill of, I mean, he's an amazing sniper, like,
Yeah.
and it like glorifies him. He's very glorified, and like even like the fact that he has a crazy bounty on his head at the end of the movie.
Yeah.
It's like, I think that it was about building up these heroes that would like represent the country during
Yes,
this time.
yeah, he is our monomythic hero, right? The American monomyth, Rishi?
Yeah, so I I think there was like a discussion post similar about this question.
Yeah.
Since he's like a hero and he like dies at the end, and it was sad that he died and all that, they couldn't like outright say that he was wrong in some aspects or anything like that.
Yeah.
So the way they presented like the opposition to the Iraq War was through like other characters talking to him. Like
Yeah.
I think it was like his colleague in like
Yeah,
like
Mark. Yeah.
in like the tent, they like talk about the war with each other, and
Yeah.
he doesn't believe in what's happening.
Right.
But Chris Kyle very strongly does. So they present it in different ways without directly like bashing him.
Yes, and I think that's a good point, yeah, because, and again, Eastwood had to walk a fine line here, right? You know, he was killed, right? You don't wanna have a movie, well, I mean, you don't want to, but we get a lot of movies about people that are complicated, but Eastwood decided to kind of present him in one way, right? And he is our war hero, yeah.
I mean, it's also like portrays him as a real hero, like not, you know, the fictionalized, they always do the right thing.
No,
It's a
he's
moral
complicated.
gray area. He did have to shoot a child and
Yeah.
a woman at the beginning of the movie, and then it cuts, you know,
Yeah.
just to give you more information about him before you just make a judgment immediately.
Which we would, right? We
Yeah.
would as audiences, that's like terrifying, right? And then we get that flashback, good, yeah,
I was just gonna say, like, it really justifies Chris Kyle in
yeah.
scary ways, especially with how he talks.
Depending
His quotes.
Depending upon how you view it, right? Like, it does justify him, right? And you can say it's scary, you know, based on like his book, right? And that Orientalist kind of xenophobia that we see pop up a little, you know, in that first chapter, pop up a lot, in that first chapter that I gave you the prologue. And that's concerning, right? At the same time, it's telling us why he does what he does. And it's trying to take a war that is not popular and say, he's still our hero, right? He's still somebody that we can root for. And so Eastwood's, it's tricky. And there's even some slippage between like, is this the Iraq War? Like some people are going to the movies, may not understand what we were doing in Iraq and thought we were there because of 9/11, right? Like, that there was a direct correlation. They forgot about the weapons of mass destruction. Yeah.
Two things. One, I think another characteristic of him is that he's kind of lost to the war for the entire film, where it's like he seems like fully in his like right mind and clearly like knows what he's doing whenever he's like at war, but then whenever he's home, he's like obviously racked by like PTSD, and he's like just kind of lost and stuck in
But
that.
he's still our hero.
But he's still our hero. And then also there's the bitch thing. I talked to my mother because my mother watched this and she was sitting there and she's like, honestly, I didn't even notice the 9/11 thing wasn't the right war that they were
Yeah.
talking about.
Yeah, it's disturbing, right? That there is that slippage, but it also makes sense. So he is our war hero, and I want you guys to keep in mind how he distinguishes him, how he's distinguished from the war hero of World War II, the good war, right? Rather than focusing on the war itself and like everybody coming together and fighting this war, we're focusing on one person because it is a complicated war. And because we don't all agree with the war, but we can support our troops. And during this time, we had our cultural movement was, don't do what we did during Vietnam, where we vilified the troops for going to these other nations, or for going to Vietnam and fighting, and they'd come back and we were really awful to them. Now we're gonna support them, because it's not their choice to go to these countries, right? They're being sent to these countries by our government, so we're gonna support our troops. So it is all about kind of like the individual. And it clearly he's meant to be our hero. Who's the actor? Right? I mean, even just like who the actor is, it's going to tell it. He's our hero. He stands out. He's not like an everyman. Like they didn't choose somebody that kind of blends in with. When you were watching Bataan, you were maybe Ricky Ricardo was the only person that you were like, no, not even that. But during that time, like I Love Lucy wasn't even a thing, right? So like you didn't know any of these characters. So like some of them were like kind of well known, but they all kind of blended together, right? But in this one, it's all about Chris Kyle, right? So okay. Wonder Woman. So let's briefly get through Wonder Woman. We talked about how troubling women are in the classical monomyth, right? Women are typically the boon or the prize that men in their hero's journey in the classical monomyth get at the end. They're also like the threat, they seduce, they are obstacles in the classical monomyth. Again, we'll explore this more in detail later on, but when we get to World War I and Wonder Woman, we have a very different kind of monomythic journey and hero because she is a female. World War I, I liked that Tipton brought up earlier that, I'm running out of time, that it is a complicated war, right? One of the reasons why Patty Jenkins says that they set the film during World War I because it was a more complicated war, like who's the good guy, who's the bad guy. The real reason, I believe, is because Captain America was World War II. They didn't want to do it. But you know, whatever. Okay. Wonder Woman, what influence did Marston have to create Wonder Woman? Where did this idea come from? Why the bonding? The bondage? Yeah, you don't have to answer that. Anyway, what was the influence during the early 1900s that would have created Wonder Woman?
Not necessarily that, but for his influence, part of it was like his own personal life and how he viewed women and stuff.
Okay, yeah. And let's go beyond him. I know he was a little complicated. He had lots of...
Wasn't it like the women's rights movement?
Yes.
And the suffragette movement?
Yes, exactly. The women's rights movements, the suffragette movement in the 1920s, like early 1900s, and bondage was a part of the iconography, right? Women would be wrapped up, and it would be about breaking those bonds of patriarchy. So don't forget that, because maybe that iconography is going to be a question on your exam, right? Women's suffrage movement, the women's rights movement, that first wave of kind of feminism. All right, so she is a love leader. We talked all about this. Definitely he had a feminist agenda when crafting Wonder Woman. And did he follow through really well? Emily, you give me a look like maybe not. All right, so what's the positive with Wonder Woman? Give me like two things that really worked well in that film. Anna, what's one thing that worked well in the film?
She ultimately fought the bad guy.
Yes, right. So she is really the hero of the American monomyth, or even the classical monomyth. She leaves the place that she was before, goes out and learns, and then takes that knowledge. She doesn't return back though, but you know, it's kind of a stilted. But at least she is the protagonist, the hero of the story. Yeah.
The whole trench line scene where she is able to break through the line. She is the thing that causes them progress.
Yes, she can pass through no man's land. The problem is she's the only woman that can pass through no man's land, right? That's not like all women can pass through it. Yeah.
That's in addition, that's in the whole thing with the thigh jiggle and whatever, and
Yeah.
being more so not for the male gaze.
Yes. There's moments where we see the camera focusing on her body, but it's like her body and weapons, right? Her body and the armor, rather than just like objectifying her, except when we get into the kill scene. And then it's all about, although still, she has a weapon on her back. It looks just like weird. But yeah, so it's a complicated representation of Wonder Woman. We talked about Steve's relationship there too, and how Steve maybe troubles it a little bit more, maybe undermines it a little bit more. And there was the article that you guys read about Steve's character. Why might he undermine her power as the hero? Yeah.
Because he sacrifices himself,
Yeah.
and she doesn't get all of the glory in the end.
No, and I keep telling you guys about at the end of Superman. He does it all, right? And he literally turns the time back in order to save Lois and defeat Lex Luthor, right? And save the community that was going to be flooded. I mean, good God. And Wonder Woman can't do it all, right? She ends up having Steve. And I don't say that's a bad thing. I don't want you guys leaving this class and being like, all she wants are women to rule the world. And that's not what I want. I have a son. I want him to be just as powerful. But I want equality. And if we don't have enough films with women that are just as strong, you know, doing everything on their own, and we get Wonder Woman, it's like, it's a step, but it's not, you know, we're not getting that full equality there. Yeah.
I say when we were talking about this, we also mentioned like how sometimes women are portrayed as like a phallic woman, just giving her all the qualities.
Yeah, so she's not, right? She still is very feminine, but again, Marston claimed that femininity was necessary because she's the love leader, and she needed to like present as this beautiful woman in order to encourage men to follow her, right? Men are led by their appetite, women are led by love, according to Marston. Okay, we're going to move on from Wonder Woman because I didn't spend a lot of time on that one. And let's talk about Chinatown. And really quick, our next term, neo-noir. What is neo-noir? This is super easy. Yeah. Neo-noir, that's it. Neo-noir. So it's just a contemporary film that uses the noir genre, characteristics from the noir genre. What are some characteristics of noir films? One characteristic, yeah, Tiffany?
There's a detective.
There's a detective, right? Often.
Usually ends, or at least majority of the conflict is in the dark.
Okay, yes, right? We definitely have a lot of low-key lighting, right?
It's very like cynical of what's happening in the actual movie.
Yes, right? Really speaks to the time of early noir, right? Not neo-noirs, but speaks to the time that it was filmed, which was in the 1940s. So while we had these films that were like, yay, war, we also had people that were like, everything sucks because we're at war again, right? And then noir has that very dark kind of tone about society. It's very cynical. Good. And we have the femme fatale, right? And so you can think about how one of these, any of these, is utilized in Chinatown, right? The femme fatale, Evelyn, is she actually the femme fatale? No, she doesn't kill anybody. She's not leading him to his death. She ends up dying, but it's playing on these noir characteristics. All right, good. So that's neo-noir. What about peripeteia? I love that term, and I just keep throwing it out there. Peripeteia, yeah.
It's like subverting expectations. We're trying to make you think that you're going somewhere and you're not.
Yeah, because we're used to the detective kind of figuring things out before us, right? Peripeteia are these moments where we diverge from the path, right? Where we think it's a clue and then we're like, nope, it's not. That throws us off, right? So that's peripeteia. And we've got a lot of peripeteia in Chinatown. Why? Yeah.
Because our main character doesn't know everything.
No, he doesn't, right? He views the world through one lens, right? He believes he understands like sexual sin, right? People cheating on each other. And what he discovers is so far outside of his purview. And we have that really horrible scene where he slaps Evelyn, right? When she says, she's my sister, she's my daughter, she's my sister and my daughter. And he keeps slapping her because he wants her to correspond to his worldview. No, this is what things should be. This is what I understand with human nature. But Tipton is right. Like, ultimately, he doesn't understand human nature because what Noah Cross represents is so far out of his purview. Yeah, Addison.
I would say also it's detective, we have this again, this voyeurism type thing that they allow us to see further because they can see beyond things, but he can't.
No. And ultimately, when he finds out the solution in a typical detective film, they find out the solution, like how did the crime happen? And everything's kind of tied up in a neat bow. And here, we're left like, we know what happened, but nothing's better, right? Instead, we end up in Chinatown where everything is ambiguous and unclear. So that's definitely what this film is trying to do. And how does it speak to the 1970s? Vietnam War, right? So that's going to be one way. How does it speak to Vietnam? Yeah.
We aren't really sure how to comprehend with what's going on. Again, this is the first time we've had media on the ground, so like war in people's minds is very different from, oh, I can think about it versus I'm physically seeing it and it's hard to cope with this.
Okay, and it was a complicated war, right? We didn't, like we said, we didn't understand why we were there, and people in power were the ones that were sending the troops over there, and what was the purpose for this, right? Yeah.
Correct me if I'm wrong, but also the people in power didn't really get punished for it.
No, I mean, that's a good point. The government, nobody was like punishing the government. I mean, it pulled us out and then that was it. We also had Nixon, so, I mean, and with the Watergate scandal. So if you wanted to talk about like how this speaks to, corrupt power and trouble with individuals in power, that really speaks to that too. Okay, so 1970s audience. And then the monomythic Eden, there is no monomythic Eden, right? Like, you think it's LA that we're saving, but even in LA, people abuse people, it's terrible. Chinatown is corrupt, right? Like, they can't understand things that are happening in Chinatown. You can't save people in that way. All right, and then the last thing, and I know we have like 2 minutes, was Chan is missing for that one. just think about how this is a postmodern film, right? So like what characteristics of the postmodern film can you apply to Janice Missing? And what is the purpose of this movie? So, yeah.
As challenge oriented ideals, especially in Hollywood and film.
Yeah, and ultimately show that Chinese American identity is fluid, right? That it's much more complicated than what we get in a film like Chinatown. Right? Okay, I'm done. I think you guys got this. Okay, any questions? All right, so I did record, so you can check out the recording. It's in NAFTA recordings. I don't know how helpful it'll be, or if you really want to listen to